Hello and welcome to When I Stop Fighting, the podcast, hosted by Daryl Dittmer, where we talk about the fight or fights that so many of us engage in this lifetime, as well as ways to potentially relieve ourselves of those fights. Let's get started. Welcome to When I Stop Fighting, the podcast. My name is Daryl Dittmer. Today I'm joined by my good friend, longtime friend, Norm Potter. Norm is a published author, a coach, educator, creator of Structured Creativity Consulting, creator of Volleyballed. I have to do this to put the D on the end. Training camps, probably hard to tell why. He's an entrepreneur and generally a really great human being. Thank you for joining us, Norm. So great to have you on today.
Thanks, Daryl. And I have to say that I'm really not bald. I'm shaved. It's a choice.
It's a choice. Well, I'll just have to say for my part, it got to the point where it felt like it wasn't a choice anymore because the tide was going out so darn far that, just it became a necessity. But anyway, so thanks so much for jumping on. I appreciate it. I appreciate you joining us. And, you and I have been friends for a long time and since college, and that's almost 40 years. But, we've both gone sort of our own ways after school. And I know about your story and you know about my story to a certain extent, but we don't know, we've never really gone on a deep dive in terms of this kind of a discussion. So I'm excited to hear your story. I'm excited to hear, what happened since that time that we actually left college and, what brings you where you are now.
Well, thanks for having me on. I do appreciate the time. And I love the podcast. I loved your book. I learned more about you in that book because it's not like you sit around and talk about your life when you're sitting in a college dorm room playing cards. So it was good to see a different side of you, just enjoyable overall to get a better picture of who you are. And as far as my life story goes, it is sort of in my book that I have there's something more called the solution-centered mindset. And I grew up in a family of 5 kids. I was the youngest of 5. And my parents were blue-collar parents that always talked about going to college, sending us kids to college, but they themselves never had the opportunity to do that or complete that. So it was just sort of what we did. It was sort of the steps that we were taking without much of a plan. I knew that I wanted to be an educator because of a teacher that I had in 8th grade. And she gave me the opportunity to do some teaching, some tutoring with some kids, and that really set my pathway to education. So in all these visits that I had, I ended up at Adrian College, and that's where our paths crossed. And I played football there, played a little bit of baseball, but really went there for the education program because I knew I wasn't going to go pro in any sport. So I figured I better get a real job background and make sure that we are trained properly. And education at that time at Adrian College, they were getting 100% job placement, so it really was a no-brainer. I get to play football for 4 more years and get ready for my teaching career. So it worked out really well. From there, I taught in my school that I did my student teaching in. I taught there for 8 years, and that was Blissfield, Michigan. And I still consider that one of my favorite schools of all time. That's sort of where I grew up as an educator. Then I went to Dundee as an administrator and a teacher. And then I went to Utah for a while, where I did some consulting and coaching at a college level as a volunteer assistant with a junior college, which was an amazing experience. Then I came back to Ohio in my consulting role and did some work at Spire Institute at that time. Now it's Spire Academy. And went back into education soon after that in 3 different school districts and realized I've been postponing my dreams for long enough. And I decided to start my own consulting company. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm working with about 20 different schools across Ohio and Michigan and working on professional development for teachers, administrators, curriculum development for whole districts, and ESCs, which are the educational groups for the counties. So I'm pretty diverse in what I'm doing right now, but loving it. And it only took me 15 years after my 30 years to figure out what I was going to do. So I'm still trying to figure out actually what I'm going to be when I grow up, but I'm getting closer.
That's good. That's good. I feel like I'm inching my way toward that as well. And by the time the party's over, we ought to have a pretty good idea of what actually we decide to do with our lives. But
Exactly. That's exactly how I feel.
no, that's great though. We've kept up intermittently, and we've seen each other and that sort of thing over the years. And I think it's so cool to, and I always thought it was cool to see the things that you're doing, and you're diversifying and some, doing different things. It's around education, but it's different things. And I just think that's been such an interesting thing to watch. I did read your book, and I thought it was really great because I relate to the human part of it and to the growth part of it, and changing and moving forward and all those things, which were kind of book, which I thought was really, really good. So tell us about that part. What made you decide to be an author?
Well, honestly, I've been wanting to do this consulting thing that I've been doing now for 3 years for the last 15 to 16 years that I've been thinking about. And finally, my wife, who you know very well, Michelle, she said, "You've been talking about this long enough. Just do it already." So, sort of that push, just get it going. And I was all set to do it in 2020. And then the pandemic hit. And I was like, this is not the time to start a new business without any clients. So I decided that it's going to be put off for another year, which was actually great because I learned more in that year about, the virtual aspect of what we could do when we can't meet face to face, which was never in my repertoire before that. I mean, it was just something that I thought about, but wasn't there. So to become an author, really the driving force was to promote the ideas that I have, and understanding that I have value in the education world and some of the ideas that I have for teachers and for schools. And the best way for me to do that at the time, I thought, was to write a book. And the nice part was that because of my professional development in the different roles I had in schools, I had most of it already written. I just had to combine it into an idea, into one sitting, and also to make it more practical. I know how to work it, but for somebody to read it and make it work is a whole different thing. So I needed good examples, and that extra year of education in the public schools really helped me figure those things out. So it's almost like my business card. I can hand that out, and people will sort of know where I'm coming from. And if they choose to like it and they want to get back to me, they do. And I'm happy to say my business is growing. So I'm not totally crazy about my thoughts. It's validation that I do have some good ideas here and there. But I do love working with people, and this is just another way to get to my why, which I mentioned in the book. That's the Simon Sinek thing: find your why. And my why is to, with kindness, to help people find their solutions. I really believe that's my purpose. And whether it be through books or through my PD or just through podcasts or whatever it may be, I can obtain my why by doing those different things.
That's great. I mean, that's just such a great story, and what moves you toward that why, and what keeps you on the path headed toward your why, which I think is just really cool. And I'm so happy that you're, so many people, I think, don't find what they would call their, quote unquote purpose or their why. And it's unfortunate. And quite honestly, much of my life, I would say I did not know what that was. I did not know what my purpose was or my why was. And, when I was in business and that sort of thing, it was, I want to grow up with a lot more than I grew up with, from the perspective of, the similar blue collar upbringing. And that was, that was my why, I suppose, at that time, but that wasn't my purpose. That wasn't, that wasn't giving back. That wasn't helping people. That wasn't, putting people, at least for my part, how can I help someone dig out of a hole or stop fighting themselves or, improve their life. And it sounds like our purposes are similar, although maybe, just coming at it from a little different perspective, which is great.
It is.
So
And I think,
go
I
ahead.
think
No.
that, yeah, I think that when you start looking at your why, if I'm reading a different book right now, it's Soundtracks by John Acuff, and he talks about those soundtracks that play in your head. And the main thing you have to ask yourself all the time, is it kind? Is it beneficial? And is it helpful? If you ask yourself those three things and the answer is yes to all of them, then it's something you should be moving forward on. And that's exactly the reason that I'm doing what I'm doing now.
Yeah, I think I applaud you. I think it's great, and I had no idea that that this was the road that you had taken in terms of just this is my decision. I'm going to be a consultant, and I'm going to do that. And I just think that's really, really cool because there's an unknown aspect to it, right? Where you just don't know what the heck's going to happen, and the bills still got to get paid. Things still have to keep churning along from that perspective. So anybody who takes that step into an entrepreneurial venture, I wholeheartedly applaud. I think that's great.
It was scary when you leave a secure job that you're comfortable in. And I think that was part of the reason why I was ready to move on. I was comfortable. I think that starting with no clients and no income and no real business sense whatsoever, it's a scary venture. But again, support from the family and support from people that I knew. And realistically, the networking that I've done over the years is huge. It's not always what it's who you know and how they are able to help, and you can help them. So, I went from no clients to 20 clients in my first year, and I've been rotating in and out of different people. And, just because of how education is, a lot of my contacts have left and went to a different place. So then I have to readjust and, find other business. So I enjoy it. I enjoy, getting the message out there, but I also just enjoy being with people and educating in different roles. It's a fun thing to do.
Yeah, that's great. It's similar where I'm at, in terms of the podcast and some of the social media stuff and being a guest on podcasts, that sort of thing. It's incredibly fun. And, this discussion notwithstanding, because you and I have been friends for so long, and it's wonderful always to reconnect and sort of dig down a little bit on the stories. But in terms of just people that I don't know and people that I'm learning about and people that I'm striking up friendships with because of that purpose and that why and fulfilling some of those things is really, really cool, because to me, it just feels a lot more pure than, and I don't mean it from a judgmental perspective, but just a lot more pure than, hey, let me see if I can work on your large work comp program and sell you this deal and, et cetera, which is very, just to me, impersonal. And it's only about money,
Right.
and so I think that's phenomenal. Now here's the big thing that I think is interesting, and one of the reasons I wanted to have this discussion today, because a lot of the people that I speak with are recovering from some sort of an addiction. As I'm sober and have been so for a long time. Was barely so when we first met. You probably saw in my book I was hanging on by a thread sometimes, but and who knew, right? Who
Right.
knew? But there's, and you're a not a recovering person from the perspective of addictions or anything like that, and what we would call in the recovery circles, you're just a normal person, and we're not familiar with the right, of course, yeah, big quotes. But we're not familiar with those people in recovery. It's kind of an interesting thing, and so I guess lining with the name of the podcast and my book, and when I stopped fighting, and what have been your fights or your challenges, or some of the obstacles, and I think it'd be really interesting to explore that.
Well, that's when you first asked me to be on the podcast. I'm like, does he think I was addicted in college? Did I act like I was addicted in college? But everybody has a battle going on, and nobody really knows what that battle is. So that's part of the reason that with kindness is part of my why, because you don't know what people are going through. But if you treat people with kindness, you figure it out that, you're helpful that way. So my biggest enemy in this whole process has been my own mental health and my own belief in myself from day one. And it was, that started at a very early age. It wasn't something that I grew into, this insecurity of being, not who I present myself as. It really was a confidence issue from day one. And it just, even though I was good at things, I never felt like I was good enough and never felt I was worthy of things. So I always had that little voice in the back of my head saying, if something good's happened, it's going to be taken away. That's how it's going to be for you. That's just what your life is going to be. So every time I had something good happen, I almost would fight it off and say, no, this isn't going to work. And I would become insecure and become my own worst enemy through depression bouts and through, anxiety and things of that nature. I found things to cope, but still it wasn't until I started really thinking about my own idea, my own path of who I truly am, that I became comfortable with where I'm at now. And so I think I just got out of puberty like 3 months ago. So I had to go through that forever. And I think that once that left, I was able to be more rational in thought, and that really helped. But when you're a high school kid with no confidence and you're leaving the only place you've ever known growing up and going to a college, I was barely hanging on to mentally. It was not a good situation my first year there. And I had no intention of coming back. So, it was one of those last minute things like, okay, I should probably stick this out. I'm going to be okay. But I still felt like I was a foreigner. I just didn't fit in really well. So my biggest enemy was my own mind. And that's a hard thing to battle because it's a constant voice. You never get a break from it. No matter what you do, that brain will doubt that you have actually done it and you've earned it. So I don't take compliments well. I never have. And that's part of it. It's just learning who you are and how you can deal with that, your own mental health and your own mental wealth, as I like to say sometimes, because if you do it right, it is mental wealth.
100% agree. Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. Sometimes that stuff isn't easy to talk about. And, me being in recovery and being sober and all that sort of thing, exactly the same. I swear you were reading it out of my book, in terms of just, that insecurity and that lack of confidence and never good enough and always having to try 7 times as hard to try to be almost as good is how it felt. And that's a tough place to be. And so I went down the road of drinking and drugs to try to quell that or try to help that and get that to subside at least a little. And it didn't work. So, I'm left with this, shell of a human being after, doing those things. And so then the question is, well, where do I go from here? What do I do with this stuff? And I was very fortunate, and I try to tell, recovering people this all the time, that we are fortunate that we have a place that shows us a different way of life and shows us a path. I mean, I grew up on the 12 steps and it is a pathway to living a life that's really freaking cool. And a lot of people don't have that. And you did not have access to that. So what was your greatest sort of ally? What were the things that helped along the way? How did that work for you?
Well, growing up with in the role that I did, I was a kicker, so I was a little abnormal as a football player. Just I get that image, and I lived up that image as a little goofy, a little off, just from the normal person. But my coping mechanism for a lot of my whole career was going down to the football field and kicking by myself and just working out thoughts and angers and everything else. And I worked pretty hard at being an average kicker in college. It was really part of, I have to succeed at doing something. And that's where I felt I could. So that's why I worked so hard at doing that. But it was also my own personal therapy of my alone time and my thinking time and making sure that I was right where I needed to be. And then when that was gone after college, I'm not going to spend 45 minutes at a football field kicking a football for no reason. Um, I had to come up with something different. And that's where I really started to struggle. I just didn't know what that was. And it comes back to I love to read. In high school, I never finished a book. Sorry, English teachers. I never finished a book in high school. But now I read all the time. I read your book in probably 2 or 3 sittings, if that. It's just something that releases me. And obviously, having a good support system of Michelle and my family around me is a huge piece of that. Knowing who your friends really are. Just when we met a few times since graduation, felt like we were back in the dorm just talking. It was like we didn't miss a beat. But there aren't many people that I can do that with, or anybody can do that with. So you find out who your true friends are, and that's where you sort of go. You rely on them to tell you that everything's okay. Even if your brain is telling you something opposite, you have to believe your friends. Otherwise, they're not your friends. Why would they hang around somebody that's as bad as I am if that was true? That's really what it came down to. And without 12 steps or without a formal, therapy session that I was going to at the time, I sort of had to just piecemeal it together. And therapy does come in the picture later in my life, and it's something I tried and worked through, and it's not easy, but it's something that's just, I think it's a positive thing. You need guidance and you don't always have it. And that's one way to get it.
For sure. I've done that too. I had stints of seeing a therapist and just trying to work things out and just because as you read, just because somebody gets sober doesn't mean they have their head together or they have, any it's sobriety is just getting rid of one of the major impediments to getting it together. So I like to say to, people, it's really is an opportunity. It is an opportunity to change the life and become our own advocate. And I think that's interesting because I am there's no doubt in my mind that much of my life I was my own worst enemy. And and that's just part of it, I think. And but that also gives me the opportunity to at some point be my own best friend. And I feel like, just from the perspective of, hey, I can do this, or I can change this, or I can, have this be different, or whatever it is. But I feel like I've been fortunate to be able to, to have been given that opportunity to be my own best friend. And for many, many years, I think, outside of Christina, my wife, who is absolutely my best friend, I'm able to give some things to myself. Have you found that's gotten a lot better for you?
It has, and I love the word opportunity. I use that all the time. That these setbacks that in some people's minds are a setback, they are opportunities. I've learned from all those mistakes, all those nights of trying to think of who I am and what am I doing. Those are opportunities that you learn from, and to be able to compliment yourself on something that you are doing well, or recognize that you're doing good things. What a huge step forward. Because I don't care if this was me doing the work that I'm doing right now 20 years ago, it wouldn't have been enough. It wouldn't have been good enough. But I know that I'm making an impact on different people in different ways, meeting needs and being kind in the process. I am grateful that I have that opportunity to do that, and to be grateful that I'm grateful. That's a weird way of saying it, but it's true. And I wouldn't have done that 10 years ago, not even 10 years ago.
That's gratitude is such a huge thing in my life, and I for so long I was interested in the whole business thing and trying to make all that work, and then at some point in my life I decided that, and I don't know how long ago this was, it had to be at least a couple decades ago, that my judgment of how my life is whether or not I wake up in the morning with a smile on my face. And that's what I want to do. That's what I want to accomplish. And gratitude is a huge part of that. Being grateful for everything, really. I think as we go through more stuff, as it's tough when you're young, but when you're an adult and you're going through it, and it's a lot easier to see some of these hurdles and obstacles and difficulties. It's easier to see those as stepping stones as we get older, and very necessary, right, to our development.
Well, and that's exactly what my solution-centered mindset is. We sort of know where we want to be. We want to be happy, but there's always these limiting factors that get in our way. And how we address those limiting factors, we have to identify them first. But once we identify them, what's our way of getting around them, or going over them? And that creates our unique pathway to that solution. So if happiness is your solution and your limitations are exactly the same as mine, which they could be, how we deal with that and how we create our path through them is going to be different. That's our uniqueness. So you sort of know where you want to be, but how do you get there? And that's the big question for a lot of people. They just see, I want to be happy, and don't know how to get there. Well, it's not just going to show up. You got to work at it. And that's a big part of what you talk about a lot, is that you're going to have to work to make this thing happen the way you want it to. It's not just going to be thrown at you. So you have to make sure that you're taking the right steps. And that's what that solution-centered mindset does. It just gives you that opportunity to look at the limitations and find your path to the known solution where you want to be. It's work, no doubt about it, but it's something that's obviously very worthwhile.
Without a doubt, it's indispensable. I mean, how do we have a life that is something that we want to wake up and do every day, unless we provide solutions for ourselves, right? And like you said, nobody's going to do it for us. So the only person I'm left with is me. And one of the things I talked about in my book was, there's only three things that we can't control in this world, and those are the nouns: people, places, and things, right? So everything outside of me really has nothing to do with me being happy. It really doesn't have anything to do with me being happy. It might provide me some momentary, like, ooh, that's great, I got a new car, or oh, they were nice to me, or whatever. But that's very fleeting. So sometimes I try to think of, I don't think of it in terms of happiness as much. I think of it in terms of fulfillment and contentment, things that are buried a little bit deeper and a little more stable, I suppose, in terms of how we can go about our lives on a daily basis.
That's so spot on. And if you look at some of the ancient teachings, and this is going off on a tangent a little bit, but life is a struggle, and it's just a matter of how you choose to handle that. That's all it is. And struggles are deep. They're not just those fleeting things that happen. Oh, I dropped my coffee out of my Michigan mug or something. It's simply more than that. And how we deal with that is life. That's all it is. And if you gain that fulfillment in the process, you're right on the right path.
100%. 100%. I mean, that's what it's all about. And for me, it is again, and I don't want to pound this into the dirt, but waking up with a smile on my face entails, I can say that, it was easy for me to say, entails how I treat my body, how I treat my mind, how I treat my heart, and how I treat my soul. It's an entire, it's comprehensive. It's something that, there's a synergy to how we treat ourselves in all of those areas. And that's the journey for me. That's what takes the exploration. You mentioned, sort of ancient teachings. I've studied that kind of stuff for a long, long time. And that's where I draw so much of my, just way of seeing the world from. And it's really helpful to be able to explore those things. And not that those things necessarily fix us or heal us or anything like that, but it gives us mile markers. It gives us ideas. It gives us things to refer back to. I swear for a long time in just starting into my 20s and 30s, I would think back, something would hit me and I'd say, wow, that makes sense. It finally makes sense. I finally understand that. And it was a seed that might've been planted 15 years ago, and so that's how we plant the seeds, right? We explore and we learn and we, continue to try to figure out this thing called life. And at some point, I think if we do the work, it will definitely click.
100% agree. And I think the more that you expose yourself to different ideas and different people, the more you have to pull from. Even if they are total jerks, you're going to learn something, and everything's a learning experience. So if you're able to transfer that information into what you need to be who you were designed to be, you have to take as much in as possible and learn from it. And that's why I talk a lot less than I used to, because I'm actually listening for the first time in many, many years. And that's because I need to learn. I'm constantly learning from everybody I interact with. And even when I joined a few of your podcast a couple of weeks ago, I learned things that I didn't know. And it was me just being a fly on the wall, listening to what's going on with other people. People are wise. You just have to pick and choose how to use it for your own self.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's such a great insight, and so important to realize. And I think that's a sign of just, maturity. And I don't mean that from an age perspective. I just mean that more from from a soul perspective. We can see and examine what the world has to teach us, and what's the world full of. I mean, we got nature and we got people, right? So that's what's going to teach us these things. And so many times I can't imagine how many times I've been taught something, or somebody said something, and it just caught my ear. And I would have said, if that person was going to sit down and try to teach me something, I may not listen. But if if something just happens and I hear something, and it's amazing how that can integrate and just put me in a position where that's another one of those seeds that gets planted, that can take root and grow and move me and change me at some point in time. We're running a little short on time. So I wanted to ask, if you were going to offer advice to someone who is starting on a journey of living, of changing, of maybe they're thinking about an entrepreneurial venture or taking some kind of a risk, or what would your advice be to that person?
Take the step. Take your first step in that direction. Learn as much as you can from anybody that will talk to you about it. Reach out to all your networking. There's, again, connections are huge. And the more you can gather information and make it your own, the better off you're going to be. So step one is to recognize what you need to do, and then go to people you trust, go to people that you marvel at. You mention it all the time in your podcast, in your books, in your book, about you have to talk to these people because they are the experts. And if you want to live like them, listen to them. You have to make sure that you're emulating behaviors that get people where they want to go. And if you don't know what those are because you've grown up in a different way, then you got to learn. So as an educator, I always say, lifelong learning is so important. And it's so true. If you want to stay important enough to stay on a podcast with your friend, but also just to find that fulfillment. So find those people that you want to emulate and talk with them. Listen to them more than you talk. This way you can pick things up. But honestly, it's just taking that first step towards that scary, angry spot. You're not sure where you're going. And it's just a matter of taking that step and seeing what happens and adjusting when it comes. That's life.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And one of the things I saw earlier today, I think it was, and I don't mean this in a difficult or tough way, but we're either growing or we're not. We're either growing towards something or we're just kind of rolling along. And to be growing towards something is just so much more fulfilling and so much more wonderful in terms of the experience, even though in many ways it's a more difficult path, but it's also an incredibly fulfilling path. So thank you for sharing that, Norm. I
Not a problem.
The first step is, to take that step is just so crucial. So how do we find you? How do we find your work? If we'd like to connect, I'd love to have you tell us where to find yourself.
So I do have a website, structuredcreativityconsulting.com. I know, I can't get it any shorter than that, but that's what it is. I am on Facebook. I am on LinkedIn, and I'm on X. So I can be found there. I think I'm Potter_Norm on Twitter, X, whatever it's called. And then you can email me. No ego problem here, but it's norm@normpotter.com.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Norm. I appreciate you sharing with us, and I appreciate, us having this conversation. It may be a conversation that otherwise we never would have had. And happy to have it. And I'm sure we'll be doing this again in the not too distant future. So thank you again.
I would love that. And I got to say, two country boys talking philosophy is pretty fun.
It's not bad, is it? Right?
No, it's not. All we need is a goat and a bale of hay, and we're all set.
All right. Thank you, Norm. I appreciate it, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Daryl.
All right.